Well, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, providing an update on the new scheme recognising products certified overseas, as well as an update on the building product specifications. Now, we should all be aware of the government's goal to reduce the cost of construction, and at the heart of this legislation is increasing competition and reducing barriers, in particular the requirement and cost for local certification of quality tested overseas building products. Today is a all of industry webinar. It actually follows a webinar we ran yesterday for product suppliers and importers. And the objective of today's session is to provide you with an update of the latest watermark recognition notices. Well, what about other building products? We'll provide an overview of what's to come in this pathway for 2026. And then there'll be a separate update on the building products specifications. My name is Matthew Duda. I'm General Manager of EBOS, and today I'm coordinating this webinar with a team of MB managers and principal advisors. We'll be introducing them shortly, and in the background we're also joined by Byron, Ellen and Evan from MB, who will be assisting with your questions and comments. We have a concise 20-minute presentation and have allowed another 25 minutes for your questions, so we'll be finished well within the hour. A recording of this webinar will be published on the Building Performance website over the next week or so. We do really appreciate your feedback, and so to kick things off, we'll just publish a poll, which we will repeat at the end of today's session. And we welcome your questions, so please use the Q&A function, and our team will look to address those either during the session online or as part of the question and answer session that will follow the presentation. Now, to kick things off, I'd like to welcome Sophie Cunningham, Manager of Building Regulatory Services. Sophie, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Matt. I can't see any slides at the moment, so I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing those, please. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll jump in.
Appreciate that for everyone.
Sorry, I don't know if that was just a me thing.
I very much doubt it. So thanks, Sophie. We are away.
Thanks,
over to
Matt.
you.
Appreciate it. Kia ora koutou. As many of you who have been following recent announcements will know, this pathway is one of three that's been introduced to give New Zealanders greater choice for building products. We ran a series of webinars late last year that explain this pathway in more detail. Recordings of those are available on our Building Performance website. So if you'd like to learn more about how this works and what it means in practice, please head on over there and have a listen. The focus of today's webinar is to provide an update to you on the notices we will soon publish and the application process we're developing for 2026. I'll provide a brief overview of this specific pathway as a quick refresher to begin the session before we jump into our update. So, at a high level, this pathway will see MB evaluating building products or building methods certified under an overseas product certification scheme and will issue a recognition notice. These recognition notices will have the same status as a code mark product certificate under the Building Act and must be accepted by a building consent authority if the product is being used within its conditions and limitations. The notice will detail what building code clauses and standards the product complies with and if there are any limitations and conditions on the product's use. So we feel like 2026 is off to a good start. Over the next couple of weeks, we are planning on publishing additional recognition notices for products certified under the Watermark scheme, swiftly followed by the release of our self-assessment and expression of interest tool to assist in helping suppliers determine whether this is the right pathway for them, which I'll give an update on in a short while. Next up is MB's goal to proactively recognise more certified products in the middle of the year, similar to our proactive recognition for Watermark certified products. MB's criteria for proactive recognition, we could base it on a particular scheme or a product category, but we're yet to kind of confirm our plan for proactive recognition at this stage, but it's an important part of our work this year. Then our anticipated go live for applications in August 2026, hopefully leading to some more recognition notices in Feb 2027. While all of this is happening, we are performing routine monitoring of the notices we've issued for Watermark and any others that we issue, particularly the Watermark notices in phase 1 and phase 2 from last year and this year. So, as many of you are aware, phase 1 of our implementation focused on issuing 22 recognition notices. These covered Watermark products certified to joint Australia and New Zealand standards, as well as the the Australian tapware standard for AS 3718. We started here because these products closely align with existing New Zealand compliance pathways, which made them the most straightforward to recognise first. Those notices were published in October last year. And as the saying goes, there's no rest for the wicked. So phase 2 of implementation also kicked off in October. And this phase looked at Watermark products certified to Australian only standards and Watermark technical specifications. This was a more complex assessment process than phase 1, but was an important step in broadening the range of recognised products. We consulted on these proposed recognition notices in November last year. And following that consultation, we've decided to issue a further 54 recognition notices. These will be published shortly and will come into effect on the 9th of Feb this year. It's important to note that MBIE has only issued recognition notices where we can be confident that the product performance aligns with equivalent performance requirements of the New Zealand Building Code. As a result, you won't see a recognition notice for every Australian standard or Watermark technical specification. These notices also don't cover every building code clause, only the clauses where MBIE was able to establish assurance based on the review of the certificate and the associated standard. It's also important to note that these notices are not blanket approval for all Watermark certificates issued under that particular standard or technical specification. Only products with certificates that are specifically listed on a current recognition notice can be used as a deemed to comply pathway. So you can find a link to all of our phase 1 recognition notices in the webinar chat or on our building performance website. It's under the Building Code Compliance and Certification Schemes tab. Bit of a mouthful. So what you want to do is navigate through to the approved products overseas pages, click on the recognition notices and move to current notices, and it should take you there. There is a slightly shorter way to do this. When you're on your own homepage on the Building Performance website, you can type in recognition notices, and if you select the appropriate search result, it will take you to the same page. If you've already visited the web page, then please be aware that as we're adding about 50 plus notices from phase 2, the structure of the web page housing the notices will likely change in early Feb to make it easier to use. We do recommend making that current recognition notices page a favorite in your web browser so you can easily find it when you need it. Our current notices are created by standard, so you can find them that way. And if that does change based on any structure changes in Feb, we will let you know how to find what you need. So once you've found a notice, whichever way you got there, you should be able to see all the information you need for its use. So here's an example. You can see on the top of the notice the building code clauses that MBIE has validated as part of the recognition process. There are conditions and limitations for this certificate on screen, which include a note actually that the certified intended uses of the products in the notice are laid out in the Watermark schedule of products. That can be found on the ABCB website. This condition is on all of our Watermark recognition notices, the ones from last year and the ones we will issue shortly too. So in terms of next step for this pathway for overseas products that aren't Watermark, as noted in our timeline for this year, in late Feb, we plan to release our self-assessment tool and expression of interest form that suppliers and importers can use to determine if they meet basic eligibility requirements and then indicate their interest for applying for this pathway. This is a good first step to help suppliers determine whether this is the right pathway for them and if they meet those basic eligibility requirements. The EOI is not a formal application and does not confirm that MBIE will accept, process, or issue a recognition notice for the certified product that has been submitted on the EOI. The types of information we'll likely be seeking from suppliers and importers is basic eligibility details, like whether their certification is actually from an accredited certification body, whether their certificate is publicly available on a website and such. We'll also highlight the need for quality documentation to be provided to us, including BEPA documentation as well. So if you're a supplier and importer looking into this pathway, then please keep an eye out for our webinar recording from a webinar we did yesterday for suppliers. That'll be on our website where we went into this in a little bit more detail. So to help manage the recognition process and give applicants more certainty, we're looking at narrowing the application process to one or more specific product categories. This will help ensure that if they apply, their submission can be processed within a reasonable and predictable timeframe. So MBIE will determine what categories and individual products we will start with. Those EOIs related to those categories or products will be invited to submit a formal application. MBIE will then begin to vet the applications for correctness, and once accepted, we'll then proceed to processing and evaluating the application, which includes an evaluation of the scheme itself first, and then an evaluation of the product certificate. If the evaluation has determined that a recognition notice can be issued for that particular certificate, MBIE will begin the formal process for recognition. The recognition notice is secondary legislation, just like an acceptable solution or verification method. And because of this, the inclusion of product certificate numbers or standards is considered incorporation by reference. This means that we need to consult and give the sector and wider public a chance to provide feedback on whether the information on the notice is suitable for recognition. After the consultation has closed and a review of the public submissions has been completed, MBIE will either finalise the notice, amend the notice to incorporate the feedback from the submission, or in some cases decide not to proceed with issuing that notice. When the decision is to proceed, the Minister of Building and Construction must table the notice in Parliament. Once tabled, MBIE then need to publish the notice in the New Zealand Gazette and on our Building Performance website, and then we will inform everybody of the outcome. Because of this, we're estimating this time from application to recognition to be approximately 6 months. So all going to plan, those with successful applications selected in the selected categories could see their products recognised around Feb 2027. Our previous webinars late last year went into further detail on the processing aspects of our recognition process, so I'd recommend checking those out if you want to learn more about the robustness of that process. So I think that's probably enough for me for now. I'll pass to Katie Simons, our Principal Advisor in our Building Performance and Engineering team, who will give us an update on the building product specifications. Thanks, Katie. All yours.
Thanks, Sophie. Kia ora koutou, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm going to talk about the building product specifications, or the BPS for short. It's another one of the 3 pathways for product compliance that was introduced last year. The BPS is a new regulatory instrument that has been created to work hand in hand with acceptable solutions and verification methods, or AS and VMs. These are our existing pathways that can be used to show that building work complies with the building code and are generally used in the building consent process. So we'll kick off with a recap. What exactly is the BPS? Well, fundamentally, it's a document. It looks like that. It's available on our website at the link there. It's at the same place. It's available alongside our other compliance pathway documents, those AS and VMs. It's a single place where product specifications and standards that were had historically have been cited in individual acceptable solutions and verification methods. We're putting them all together in one place. So this is intended to replace information about building products that are spread across multiple AS and VM documents. In the process of moving product specifications and product standards from AS to VMs, AS and VMs into the BPS, we've gone through a process of citing additional new product standards, as long as once we've assessed that they require equivalent or better performance than what we already cite. So in this way, the whole point of what we're doing here is to provide more compliance options. Products that are made possibly made overseas in accordance with one of those product standards now have a clear compliance pathway. So there's more options for those overseas products. And finally, one other important point about the BPS is it's when it was created, the rules that we must follow to publish and update it are simpler, and they're less onerous than what we have to do when we publish and update AS and VMs. So that means the update process we have to follow for the BPS is more streamlined. So we can therefore add product standards by amending and updating the BPS more frequently than we can do those AS and VM documents. So now let's look at how the BPS document, fits into our building code system. So like many regulatory systems, our building code system is commonly referenced with a triangle framework. Sort of seen a version of it earlier. Here it is again. Again, at the top, just to kind of run through it, we've got the Building Act, followed by the Building Code. So these are mandatory, set in legislation. You must comply with those. But underneath those, we have compliance pathways, so ways that you can demonstrate how you comply with the code and the act. These are providing options to demonstrate compliance. We've got a performance-based building code, so we don't dictate what you must do to comply, but MB does provide pathways to compliance that, if are followed, these must be accepted by building consent authorities as compliant with the code requirements. And yeah, the ones we're talking about now are the acceptable solutions and verification methods. So as mentioned previously, the BPS contains information about products, either specification information and or citations of product standards that were previously found in AS and VM documents. We've moved them to the BPS, so you can think of it now as a bit like an appendix to those AS and VMs. That's why it's kind of indicated sort of in the same block, but sitting underneath the AS and VMs. The important point is when an acceptable solution or verification method references the BPS, that content of the BPS becomes part of that compliance pathway. And so building work that adheres to those settings, i.e. uses building products that follow or conform with standards that are in the BPS, they must be accepted as compliant with the building code. It's really important to remember that products must be used within the scope and limitations of the AS or VM, i.e. just because a product standard is cited in the BPS, it doesn't mean that products that conform with that standard can be used in all situations and automatically comply with the building code. Details about how the product can be used in building work that are set out in the AS or VM must be followed in order to demonstrate compliance. So in other words, you can't use the BPS in isolation to demonstrate compliance with the building code. So now let's look at how the BPS document itself is structured. So when we designed this document, we decided to set it out so that the structure of it matches how building products generally appear in a building project specification, rather than arranging it by building code clause. Because we've designed it to be used by suppliers and importers, including those from overseas who might not be familiar with our various building code clauses and the myriad of documents that sit underneath them, this is the single source of product information. We've currently got the following product types covered in the document. So the structural materials, concrete, steel, timber, cladding, windows, plasterboard with respect to its bracing properties, insulation, HVAC systems, as well as fire characteristics of many types of products. It sounds like a lot, but we know it's not yet a comprehensive source of all the product information that sits in our building code system. Some of that information does remain in the AS and VMs. As we move things across, we're carefully considering alternatives to what we're currently citing. This can be quite complex when products contribute to compliance for a number of different code clauses. And for instance, plasterboard, as we've already mentioned, see that can support compliance with structural requirements in terms of its bracing, but also weather tightness, acoustic, and of course fire performance requirements. So yeah, it's not yet comprehensive. We're working through the process, but as I mentioned, we have a streamlined update process. So we're planning to update this document regularly. The first edition was published in July 2025, and Amendment 1 is already underway. I'd suggest that you make sure you are signed up to our mailing list so that you're in the loop about when the BPS is being updated. We currently reference significant number of product standards, about 130 are in the first edition. We're looking to increase that to about 150 when the first amendment is published soon. So yeah, we're consulting on that first amendment at the moment. So I'll move on to tell you a little bit about that now. So Amendment 1, the first amendment of the first edition, is proposing additional product standards and updated specification information for the following types of products. We're looking at changing, adding information for timber bracing elements, sound insulation, fire doors, and fire-resistant glazing. And we really want to hear your feedback. We really want to know, have we got our analysis on whether this information we're proposing to include does indeed require equivalent or better performance than what we currently cite? When we consulted on the first edition of the BPS back in May, June last year, we received about 70 submissions on the consultation. So I can assure you that we do read every one. So for this consultation, please take a few moments to tell us what you think of the proposals. The link to go to make your submission is there. The consultation opened before Christmas. Given the summer break period, it's going on until Monday the 9th of February, 5 o'clock. So you've still got plenty of time to have a look and tell us your thoughts. Yep, so yeah, head over to that MB Have Your Say page, look out for the BPS First Edition Amendment 1 consultation. Once we've analysed your submissions, we're aiming to publish the updated BPS shortly after, within the next few months for sure. But the other thing I want to tell you about now is that we're looking to continue to add to the BPS with further updates in the near future. So let's look at how you can contribute to these. We've set up a feedback form on our website. It's directly linked from the BPS page. So the same page that you view the BPS, if you go down to the bottom, you can see this link to this feedback form. And this is where you can send us your suggestions of standards or other specification information you think that we should consider for future editions of the BPS. We're going to need the following types of information for your suggestions. So if it's a product standard, the name and version of that standard, what purpose would it be used for in the building code? How does it fit into the building code system, and specifically, how does it fit into our current acceptable solutions and verification methods? So which of those AS and VM documents would cite that portion of the BPS that would have this new information? We need to understand how it's equivalent or better with standards and the requirements that we already cite, or if there's any differences to standards that we already cite. And we can work around those. We can put kind of caveats around how we cite this product information. So that's all perfectly possible. We just need to understand it. So yeah, please tell us that information. And yeah, by telling us standards that we could cite in the BPS, and if you think that would remove a regulatory barrier by doing so, you've got the opportunity to shape this regulatory system for building products. So I'd really encourage you to send us your suggestions, and that feedback form will be there kind of indefinitely. So yeah, there's no deadline for doing that. You can do that at any time. Thanks. Then I'll now pass back to Matt to summarize what we've covered and go to your questions.
Thanks, Katie. Great. So in summary, today we've covered firstly about the overseas product certification scheme. Suppliers will be able to assess the suitability of recognition notices for all building products from February 2026. And for those that are suitable, they'll be invited to complete an expression of interest. In August, MB will select a small number of product categories for the first batch of applications for recognition notices. They'll base this on the expression of interest received from suppliers and potentially from their own decisions. Katie then gave us an update on building product specifications. There are currently over 130 cited standards, which is likely to grow to 150 shortly. And remember, you have until the 9th of February to have your say on key building product categories, including timber structural elements, acoustics, and certain passive fire products. And you can influence the future focus of building product specifications. So be sure to fill out the form on the Building Performance website to have your say about what you believe should be included in BPS in the future. And finally, make sure that you are receiving MB updates to keep abreast of all their developments in what is a busy market. Right, so now it's time to get into a few of your questions. And Katie, since we have you on screen, I will start with you.
Sure.
Question here, are there scheduled dates for further BPS updates?
Thanks, Matt. Well, at the moment, we're working hard to deliver the proposals that have gone out, are up and under consultation for that first amendment to the first edition. Once this current consultation closes, we'll obviously look to as I say, analyse the submissions, publish the amended version. Further updates are going to focus on the product information that still remains in our AS and VM documents, but they'll also be driven by what we hear from the sector in terms of suggestions for product standards that could go into future editions, and we'll prioritise them accordingly. So please, as I mentioned, engage with that feedback process and let us know your thoughts. I mean, on timeframes, we'll definitely be updating the BPS before we make changes to any settings in our AS and VM documents because of that streamlined process that I mentioned that enables us to do that so we can update the BPS more regularly. So, yep.
Okay, Katie, I'll stick with you. There's been talk for a while about an update to NZS 3604.
Yep.
Could there be any impact with an update of that, considering its significance?
Sure. I mean, so 3604 is currently being revised. That's being run and managed by Standards New Zealand. We are expecting a public consultation on that, so open a draft version to be made available for public comment around March this year. Obviously, 3604 is a key standard for building work in New Zealand. It's cited in a number of AS acceptable solution documents, B1, E's and G's. If during the revision process product standards are identified that could be alternatives to product standards that are currently cited in 3604, they could be considered for citation in the BPS. So yeah, sure. We basically want to make sure that the standards that go into the BPS are aligned with other standards that we cite. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Katie. And March is not far away.
That's right. Keep your eyes peeled.
Many of us will be looking forward to seeing that. Great. Yeah. Thank you. Sophie, I'll bring you in. There's a question here. So could some recognition notices not reference all code requirements?
Yeah, good question. So for those of you that are kind of familiar with CodeMark certificates, will know that those certified products need to have all building code clauses relevant to its intended use on the certificate and be assessed. Recognition notices, however, offer a different pathway, and there are some limitations to recognition notices. So they are scheme specific, meaning that MB must first evaluate and recognise the overseas certification scheme before the product certificate, and the scope of the recognition is quite tightly defined. So the notice will specify the product's intended use, the relevant builder code clauses, and any conditions and limitations. But the code clauses we can note as the product complying with will be dependent on the information on the certificate that we can evaluate and validate at the time of our evaluation. So there could be instances where other relevant code clauses may apply that aren't on the notice.
Okay. Sophie, I'll stick with you.
Sure.
So can you just confirm when we're likely to see recognition notices for more general building products, non-watermarked?
Yeah, sure. So probably going to be two touch points for this, I would say, that we know of at the moment. So any notices that come out of our proactive recognition round in the middle of the year will likely see some recognition notices issued. How many and what are they? Don't really know yet, but we do intend to issue some around that time. And then as per kind of the timeline before, we'll hope to see some more recognition notices again in Feb 2027 after that application process.
Yep. You mentioned that there'll be a period for public feedback before recognition notice is approved or confirmed. So a question here, how will we know when this is open for public feedback?
Sure. So probably the best way is how everybody probably gets these notifications is keep an eye out for our building performance updates and our newsletters for consultation information that will come through those normal channels. But outside of that, if you have any concerns for any notices already issued, kind of outside of that consultation period, then please kind of do contact us at our overseas products inbox. So it's overseasproducts@nb.govt.nz.
Yep. So Sophie, is that in a similar way that we get determinations notices, is that you'll be pushing out updates with links for people to then view what has been put forward?
Yep, for sure. So as Katie's got that link to the Have Your Say page for the consultation for the BPS, our consultations for these recognition notices will be in the same place. So they'll all be kind of NBY consultations.
Okay, you just touched on this, which is a nice segue. Products can change over time. Do recognition notices expire or require renewal? And are recognition notices going to be monitored?
Good question. So recognition notices don't expire, but as you can kind of, if you remember our timeline back in the slides, we will monitor them regularly to ensure that they remain fit for purpose. So this could be monitoring of expired certificates that might be on that notice or soon to be expired certificates, changes in certificates, changes in standards, or adding any information that comes to light that we deem relevant to be on that notice. So yes, in short, they will be monitored, but kind of if you, to my previous point, if you do have something that you want to give feedback on that you see in one of those notices, then feel free to just let us know.
Great. Okay, Sophie, I'm going to stick with you.
Sure.
You talked about the process of expression of interest through into applications. When a recognition notice is published, will it contain information about the applicant? Will we know who has made the application?
Yeah, so in short, no. A recognition notice, as you can kind of see from what we showed, contains details relating to the product certificate for the product, which is publicly available information. We won't be publishing any additional information about the applicant or the supplier or importer for that recognition notice.
Okay. COMARC has a deemed to comply pathway as well. It, as part of the requirements, it needs a New Zealand specific manual. Is that something that would be required for a recognition notice?
Yeah, another good question. So any additional information that supports evidence of compliance with New Zealand Building Code would be really beneficial in that application process. What was kind of clear from the feedback from the wider sector was that these recognition notices, because they have the same status as CodeMark certificates, it's important for us to make sure that the process is robust, and we agree, and that there's clear evidence of code compliance. So kind of as such, any evidence that supports that, whether it be a manual or something similar, that kind of supports that certificate being recognised and our evaluation of it would be beneficial for applicants to provide to us at the time of application, for sure.
Okay, great, thank you. Sophie, I feel like I'm hammering you, but I'm just going to keep.
That's okay.
I'm just going to keep going.
It's all right.
You mentioned that as part of the MB process, that not only will the certificate be evaluated, but also the scheme. What does
Mhm.
that mean?
Yeah, this is probably really important to note, especially for those that are looking to intend to apply for this or use this pathway. And we've touched on it in previous webinars, and I'll kind of touch on it again here. The process for recognising overseas product certificates involves two steps. So first is the assessment of the product certification scheme against the criteria that we have in our regulations, and then the evaluation of the product certificate that's come from that scheme itself. So when someone applies for product evaluation through this pathway, we'll assess the scheme. We'll check, is the scheme accredited to an appropriate standard by a recognised accreditation body? Does the scheme have robust processes, policies, and procedures in place? But kind of more importantly, do those processes, policies, and procedures kind of look at how they certify and monitor products or methods, whether the scheme ensures its staff and its certifiers act independently, professionally, impartially, all that sort of stuff. So the checks for that are essential for us to ensure that the overseas certification scheme is trustworthy, and then that the product certificate can be relied on to meet building code requirements. So there could be an instance where you would have someone apply and this MB make a decision that the scheme is not suitable, and then we wouldn't evaluate the product certificate from there. That could happen during that application process. So important to know that it is two parts.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. Hey, we've got a question here that relates to Watermark. So I know we've got Byron lurking around in the background. Byron, are you around? Oh, excellent. Thank you, Byron. Nice to see you. Question, with the shift to lead-free coming in May this year, has lead-free been considered for recognition of overseas products? For example, did we were those excluded from recognition in this round? Any comments on that?
Got it. Yes, everyone's aware that lead-free and DZR requirements are coming in under G12 AS1 as of 1st of May. So just before we kind of go into lead-free, I'll just cover off DZR. So DZR is already a requirement under the Watermark scheme. So that one's already there, already meets those requirements. What we have done is treated any kind of copper alloy product the same way we would any other product coming into New Zealand. So it will have to have the mandatory copper testing as stated under G12 AS1 for the applicable copper products. One thing I did want to add in is that it is only for potable water supply. So if that copper product is in direct contact with the potable water supply, then it has to meet lead-free. If it's used in irrigation or a non-potable scenario, then it will not have to meet the lead-free requirement. So just be aware of that. And just as we come to the 1st of May, to everyone, please keep an eye out on our website as we will be releasing consistent updates as well as any kind of exclusions are on our website in terms of appliances and the other things. So yeah, short on that.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Byron. Appreciate the detail. We're coming to the conclusion of your questions. So yes, thanks, Nancy. We've just got a closing poll here. Appreciate your feedback on the information presented today. Finally, again, Sophie, I'll come back to you. How could we not include the impact of an election?
Sure.
We've got that coming up in November.
Mm-hmm.
So question here, can any of these timeframes be impacted by the election timing and differing results?
Sure. So in terms of time frame, yes, they can be impacted because some of them are secondary legislation and we do interact with the minister in regards to that. But we've done our best to align anything that requires interaction with the minister's office to fall outside of that shutdown period for the election. So if that kind of changes, we'll keep everybody informed for that. Thanks, Matt.
Great. So actually got a final question in here.
Sure.
Thanks, Quentin. Just a question around the process. Who pays for the assessment of certification, and what are MBIE's charges?
Good question. I can answer that one, Matt. Essentially, there is no fee for completing the self-assessment or the expression of interest form. There is also at this stage no fee for the application process either. So hopefully that answers that question.
I think that does. Short and simple. Well, look, I think it's a good time now for us to conclude today's presentation. And firstly, I'd just like to thank Sophie and Katie for their presentations today, and also our team behind the scenes for helping with your questions. Also like to thank everyone here for your attendance today and for your input also into the polls as well. That's essential feedback for us. Now, over the next week, you will receive an email once the webinar recording is posted to the Building Performance website. Feel free to share that within your team and wider colleagues. And with that, I would like to wish you a productive and enjoyable Thursday, and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you, and have a great day.